Here we go. Today is Monday. May the 4th be with you, I guess, right? 2020. And
yeah, this is like Harry Potter Celebration Day, right?
Yes. Harry Potter meets Star Trek.
Right. This is like when evil Kirk learns to play Quidditch.
Correct. Exactly.
Got it.
And
That's awesome.
with some tribbles, right? And this is episode 251 of the Defensive Security Podcast, just 5 episodes away from the what is sure to be consequential to the 8th Power episode 256.
It's true.
So
if we make it. We are in the plague times.
We definitely are in the plague times. So just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So probably be a little bit of a short show. I just finally released the last one a week late. So sorry about that, everyone. First story today comes from SecurityWeek.com, and the title is Recent SALT Vulnerabilities Exploited to Hack Lineage OS Ghost and DigiCert Servers.
I got to be honest, I was unaware of this particular application, but apparently it's a pretty big deal. A lot of people use it, but it just slipped by me.
Yeah, it's quite flexible. I know a lot of organizations that use it to manage pretty large scale organizations across a diverse set of technology. So the one, it's I would call it more of a framework. As much of a framework as anything, right? It's it's pretty flexible, but takes a lot of configuration. But it is pretty widely used. The story here is that last week there were 2 vulnerabilities disclosed. One of them quite severe was a remote code execution vulnerability, CVE or CVSS score of 10. And in the interceding days, a number of organizations have actually reported being hacked through this, and I don't think there's been any significant consequence. I mean, I'm sure there's organizations that have been hacked by this and either don't know it or
because often this is internet facing, right? I mean, this is usually a internet-facing app.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be, right? And that's what I wanted to really talk about. The ones that have been exploited were exploited because they were internet-facing. And over the weekend, after this was known, some people were, doing their Shodan magic, and I think there were something like 6,000 instances. Obviously, accessible from the internet. Probably most of those probably not patched, but it is interesting though that the 3 they name here don't appear to have suffered much in the way of damage. It looks like Lineage OS, which is a distribution of Android. Apparently, they got hit with CryptoMiner, which seems like a lost opportunity or missed opportunity for some bad guys.
Yeah, it's almost like they had a preset payload with an automated vulnerability, exploit kit, and they just threw a new vulnerability into their exploit script and kept the same payload.
Yeah, and the same thing with Ghost. Ghost, for those of you who aren't aware, is it's a blogging platform that I think there's like a free open source version, and then there's a hosted version. It's
also the 4th best movie Patrick Swayze ever did.
Well, good. That's
the first being Roadhouse, of course.
Of course. Where else can you get this sort of hard-hitting news?
And it's amazing that you get it for free.
It's true. It's true. I go to I wake up every morning wondering, hey, what am I going to learn from Kellett today?
Carry on.
So anyway, Ghost, they were some of their infrastructure was hit too with crypto miners, and then DigiCert was the third named victim here, and apparently it was one of their certificate transparency logs. And it's a little unclear to me exactly what happened, if their keys were stolen or accessed or not. There's some discussion in this and some other forums that the certificate transparency logs after a particular time shouldn't be trusted. But by the way, they were apparently in the process of decommissioning this particular transparency log. So, again, didn't seem like a massive damage here. But again, these are just the ones we've heard about because I think they had pretty, they were either high visibility like DigiCert or they were open source like Ghost and Lineage OS. There's probably quite a few other organizations that were hit by this and either don't know it or have not, have not come forward and may never come forward. But this is this is something that I have been concerned about for quite some time, which is, focus, the increasing focus on using IT tools, especially some of these cloud native automation tools, which in my experience tend to be less well managed, because historically, and I've gone on rants about this in the past, but historically, development tools that were once buried deep in test labs and whatnot were often not managed as production systems. And
so when you say not well managed, like the code isn't hardened and they're not on a secure coding lifecycle and that sort of thing, or do you mean like admin well?
C, all of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. From especially the latter, right? From the perspective of the IT shops that are consuming these products, they historically have been, again, run by development teams or managed by development teams and not patched well or timely because doing that causes delays in development cycles and so on and so forth. And my observation is that over time, those tools have, the development environment and the tools have changed pretty radically, and the placement of them has obviously changed too as we've moved to more cloud native and cloud centric operations. But I don't perceive that a lot of organizations have really updated their threat models and their the way they think about these development tools. I mean, either in policy or in practice. I mean, sometimes organizations will update their policy, but it doesn't really translate into changing how things are actually done. But this is pretty concerning. Good news is, again, it doesn't seem like there were too many animals harmed in the making of this vulnerability that at least what we see so far. But I really, really am concerned as an industry. We've got to get our arms around these automation tools because they're no longer buried in the network and isolated and, where they can't really harm anything. They're actually, completely, they're at the tip of the spear. You compromise one of these things and effectively you can get, in many cases, to every component of the environment, including customer data and whatnot. So it's, And
it seems also, and I could be wrong, but not a lot of organizations may have really solid knowledge of running this sort of thing at the edge. Or this is something we've seen before where certain code that's been relied on for lots of other code has a problem, and people don't even know that it's built into their code or that they're running some open source piece of, we saw it like with OpenSSH, I believe, a year or two ago, that, or something like that, where it was a very, very well-known and well-used piece of open code that was embedded into a whole bunch of things that people didn't realize was embedded into, and they had trouble knowing that they needed to patch. And I could see that with some of these other sorts of tools like this, especially if it's on the edge. So I don't have a good answer other than, you really do need to understand what's inside the tools you're bringing up, that, especially if it's internet facing.
Yeah, I mean, it's discipline. It comes down to discipline. I will say that I think one of the examples of what you were trying to get to was like Apache struts. That was a piece of open source code that many organizations didn't identify that they had in their stuff. But there are a dearth of these automation tools, and they're evolving really rapidly, and they're kind of evolving around the evolving DevOps and DevSecOps models, and so you kind of see the do-si-do, and what was Jenkins or Ansible or Puppet or Chef or a couple of years ago is now something else, and so I'm concerned that a lot of shops don't have time to develop competence and best practices and implementing these things in a secure manner. Not to say that we should intentionally hit the brakes, but we ought to make sure that they're being deployed in somewhat of a secure manner. At least don't make them accessible from the wide open internet. But this is, by the way, I think this is really pointing to a bigger trend that I strongly expect to see, which is using IT tools against ourselves. We've seen some examples of that. There was I think earlier this year, late last year, one of the MSPs was compromised in their, the automation tools they were used or they had were used to push ransomware to customers. And
well, it was heavily rumored that Target was
true. Yep.
Their internal system management system was used to distribute the malware to their POSs.
Yeah.
I don't know that we ever got confirmation of that, but it was heavily rumored.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean, why not? I mean, if you're a bad guy and you get into a system and to look for the automation tool, hey, it's efficient. Well, bad guys are lazy.
It's efficient. They're often not well managed, and they typically have a vantage point that allows you to do take unilateral action across the entire organization. So like if it's if you wanted to completely compromise an organization in whatever way you wanted to, this is the place to do it, right? Whether you want to do ransomware or steal their data or mine cryptocurrency and all of the desktops. It's one-stop shopping.
I was thinking about this when I was running a vulnerability management tool. A lot of the vulnerability management tools have admin level rights to log into things to pull full inventories of stuff, like whatever you're running. That seems like a wonderful tool to go breach because it's usually got access to touch everything on the network and has credentials to everything on the network.
Yeah. Not many people. I mean, that's going to probably, by the way, evade all of your or most organizations' detection, right? Because
you got that tuned out. You
got the vuln scanners tuned out because you expect to see bad stuff coming from them. I'm not. By the way, it seems intuitive that this is likely to become the vuln scanners with authenticated scans are likely to become a big problem. I've not seen it happen yet. That doesn't mean that it hasn't happened yet, but
we need to sell a firewall to protect vulnerability scanners.
That's true, as long as it has some artificial intelligence in it. Yes.
Oh, and blinky lights,
of course.
And machine learning.
Correct. Well, I said artificial intelligence, but yeah.
And hybrid cloud aware.
Correct. Yes.
I mean, it doesn't do anything with it. It's aware that it's there, but it doesn't
Right.
actually do anything with it. It just knows about it.
Correct. Absolutely.
The VCs can line up to the left.
I like it. All right. So moving on to the next story. This one comes from ZDNet. The title is "Ransomware Mentioned in 1,000 plus SEC filings over the past year." So not it's not no specific incident to talk about here, but we've over the past several weeks we've been talking a lot about the evolving landscape of ransomware, and in the U.S. at least, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which oversees public companies and dictates what companies must disclose to investors, has been pretty activist in communicating that the companies need to enumerate what kinds of cyber risks they might be susceptible to. And so the story here is that we're seeing a lot of companies, including some household names like Alphabet, the parent company of Google, American Airlines, McDonald's, Tupperware, and Pluralsight, which is kind of interesting because that's an IT security learning platform, are disclosing the threat of ransomware in their in their SEC filings to investors. So pretty interesting stuff.
Well, it just tells us that it's up at the board level of awareness now.
Yes, yeah, and they point out they did point out that the average impact is about for a ransomware attack is about $110,000, and that's just the average. It probably follows more of a power law distribution. So there's probably a whole bunch on the lower end, and a few, much higher.
Yeah, and this isn't saying that all these companies have had ransomware. It's just that they're aware of it as a potential risk that could materially impact their earnings, which is why it's in their filings.
Exactly.
So it's interesting.
Yep. Yep. They pointed out they talked about the recent attack on Norsk Hydro, which apparently suffered about $75 million in costs resulting from their attack. But that's the whole point of this is for these organizations to communicate the potential risk to their investors. And it's interesting to me that ransomware has now gotten to that level where it's something that just the specter of a ransomware attack is something that has to be disclosed to investors.
Which is interesting because, my way of thinking, ransomware is the result, not the cause. Ransomware is the payload. So, in my mind, you really should be talking about the exploit methodology because it could be easily shifted to something else. Now, ransomware in and of itself is a very impactful exploit and a very costly exploit, so I could get that. But it's actually, in my mind, not talking about the true symptom. The true symptom is however that ransomware got in the first place. Because the ransomware got in, something else could get in. Whether that be, industrial espionage, exfiltration, whether that be, I don't know, anything.
Well, it's a really interesting point because, companies suffer potentially all sorts of different types of attacks. And you're right, but this is the one that they choose. This is the end of the chain that they choose to disclose. They don't choose to disclose that there's a risk of having their intellectual property stolen, or
which makes me wonder if this is being driven by either the SEC auditors or the Big Four consulting firms, and it's now in vogue to do this.
Possibly, I suspect that there's also a likelihood issue too, right? That if you get hit by, I think a lot of organizations probably have come to acknowledge that on any given day you're kind of rolling the dice of whether you go into work and you're going to have a big ransomware problem or not. And if you do, it's front page news.
Yeah.
You can't hide it. That
if you're a public company, sure.
If you're a public company, right? It's going to be out there, and then probably there's also downstream impacts too. Like if you're, given what we've talked about a lot in the past with the new trend to not only encrypt your data but steal it and then threaten to disclose it. There's no longer the discussion point of did the, I should say rarely. It's not a given anymore that the data wasn't necessarily accessed by malicious actors, and that has implications for things like GDPR and HIPAA and all the other data privacy laws, which is a potential cost of the having one of these attacks, right? Because if you get hit by ransomware and all of your European personal information is taken, now you're potentially looking at a significant fine in addition to all the other costs that come along with one of these attacks.
Yeah, that's fair.
So anyway,
so you got to turn on the protect against ransomware button.
That's correct.
On your Blinky box.
That's correct, and you should put that extra ransomware firewall on your network, right? Absolutely. Look, that there's no easy answer, and I think that's the challenge, right?
That's why it's effective.
It is, but we have to improve because we're, it's in the past, if an organization fell victim to ransomware and they lost all of their data, it was really a harm. I mean, for the most part, there were obviously edge cases like hospitals and whatnot, but it was really a harm to the company. And now with the recent trend, it's it is more of a potential harm to the people whose data you as an organization are holding.
And by recent trend, you mean the ransomware guys grabbing data and threatening to leak it and leaking it when they're not getting the ransom paid.
Exactly. So it's no longer just the organization that's been hacked and ransomware that's suffering. It's also the end individuals whose data these companies hold, and so there's an obligation to protect that data, which I think is even more acute. It was always there, right? But I think it's much more acute now, and we really have to get about the business of enhancing our protections and detection so that we don't fall victim to this stuff.
Well, I don't know what the exact stats are, but I'd be willing to wager 75% of ransomware comes in via email. So, I mean, that seems to be where we should focus our attention, of having really strong email protections and running them very, very effectively. And that's an interesting problem that I've seen in some companies, that some of the email protections are being run by a messaging team or an email team, not necessarily a security team. And sometimes you've got a conflict of interest there, or at least competing, incentives of false positives versus false negatives, blocking emails, that need to get to people that might be suspected malicious but aren't. There's a whole bunch of weird incentives that kind of come into play, competing incentives, when you start talking about email security. But email is incredibly risky, and we're not doing a good job of solving that problem. After 20 years, it's still incredibly risky. And you pair that with a little bit of social engineering, you're gonna get success hits. You're going to get people to click or do what you want them to do, and it's not because they're stupid or dumb or anything. It's just the way that social engineering is very effective at attacking people psychologically. So, I mean, that's where I would focus my attention, is having a really good control point around my email and looking at some dedicated email security products that are run very, very effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly email is going to be a popular tool for attackers probably till the end of time. But we are, as we've talked about in the past, there are evolving other channels, right? RDP is a popular way. OpenRDP servers, web compromising web applications, and so on. So it's a difficult problem. There isn't one solution, and which is why they call it work, right?
Yeah. But we try to offer, solutions on the show, and it's tough that this one's just a lot of the basics and the block and tackling. If, again, because there's so many different ways to exploit, and ransomware is the payload. When you focus on the payload, you sometimes forget that payload can be delivered many, many, many different ways.
Right. But I think the core issue is that the real solution, or a large part of the solution is kind of the unsexy work of patching and designing networks well, and designing permission models well, and and doing a good job of vulnerability scanning, and keeping track of what middleware and components you have on your web servers, and these things are not. They're not cutting edge machine learning. I mean, I suppose maybe you can, if you have creative people, you can turn this into interesting, challenging problems. But at the end of the day, it's basic block and tackling for the most part, and we have to keep focus on it.
Indeed, I don't disagree.
All right, well, that is all the time we have for today. I definitely appreciate all of your attention, and I really do hope everybody is doing well, that your families are healthy and well, and that your life will get back to normal relatively soon. So all the best to you. All right. Well, we will talk again soon. Thanks to our Patreon donors. And I think there's probably going to be some news about conferences being rescheduled soon, so we may have some things to talk about there coming up in the near future.
Indeed. Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome. Always appreciate all the donations. Hey, if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can. I'm at Lerg, L-E-R-G, and Jerry's at Malicious Link. Or just, look for the llamas. Follow the llamas.
Follow the llamas, that's right. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.